His daughter's hands. There is a moment in the space between falling and landing when the body tells the truth. Not what the face shows, not what the voice says. The body, the hands specifically, the way they reach or don't reach, the way they brace or surrender. In that half second before impact, every person reveals something they spend the rest of their life trying to keep hidden. Most people panic. Their fingers splay, their wrists lock, their palms hit the floor with a sound that carries embarrassment in it, that hollow slap of someone who wasn't ready, someone who didn't see it coming, someone who is already calculating how quickly they can stand up and pretend nothing happened. That's what fear sounds like when it hits linoleum. On a Tuesday morning in late September, in the cafeteria of Ridgeway High School in Harlow, North Carolina, a girl named Sloan Holt hit the floor. Her lunch tray spun away from her. The plate of food rice green beans, a roll scattered across the tile in a wide arc. A carton of milk tipped and leaked a slow white trail toward the wall. The sound of the tray spinning was the loudest thing in the room for exactly 1 second. Then the laughter started. It came from one corner first. Then it spread the way laughter always does when it smells blood in the water. Students turned in their seats. Phones came up. Some people didn't even look. They just smiled at the reaction of the people sitting next to them, which is its own kind of cowardice. 3 boys stood over her. Colt Brennan was 17 years old, and he had never once in his life looked small. He was built for the basketball court, long arms, wide shoulders, the particular confidence of someone who has been the most important person in every room he has walked into since the 8th grade. He stood with his weight on one leg, the way people stand when they've already won and they know it. He was smiling. Behind him, Dax Merritt and Tanner Voss were smiling too. The smaller, quieter smiles of men who have chosen their side and are comfortable there. "Welcome to Ridgeway," Colt said. He let the rest of it hang in the air unsaid, which was worse. And then the camera in the minds of everyone watching and the phones that were already recording moved to Sloan. She was on the floor. Her left knee was bent under her. Her right hand was flat on the tile, and her left hand rested open beside it. Not clenched, not braced. Flat and open the way you'd set your hand on a table to hold a conversation. Still, in all the noise of the cafeteria, the laughter, the scraping chairs, the whispered commentary of 200 teenagers watching something they would talk about for the rest of the school year, Sloan Holt's hands did not move. They didn't reach up defensively. They didn't curl into fists. They rested on the cold linoleum floor, the way a man rests his hands on a steering wheel when he's on a long highway and he's done being in a hurry. Patient, deliberate, waiting. She looked up at Colt Brennan, and she didn't look frightened, and she didn't look angry, and that more than anything else that morning was the thing nobody in that cafeteria knew what to do with. She stood up slowly, brushed her jeans at the knee, looked at her food on the floor, looked back at Colt. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. But nobody in that cafeteria, not Colt Brennan, not Dax Merritt, not Tanner Voss, not the 200 students recording on their phones, none of them understood what they had just seen. None of them understood that those hands on the floor were the product of something long and deliberate and painful built over years by a man who was no longer alive to see what he had made. To understand what happened in that cafeteria, you have to go back 5 years. You have to go back to a morning at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, when the air smelled like pine resin and motor oil, and the particular kind of clean that only exists before 6 in the morning before the heat builds up and the day puts its full weight on everything. You have to go back to a girl who was 13 years old and a man who was running out of time, though neither of them knew it yet. Fort Bragg sits in the sandhills of central North Carolina, and in the summer of 2019, it was home to roughly 50,000 soldiers and their families spread across a landscape of low pines and red clay and the constant distant sound of things being tested to their limits. Garrett Holt had lived on or near Army installations for 16 of his 20 years of service. He knew the sound of a base waking up the way reveille moved through the air. Not as a single sound, but as a wave, the way dogs in the neighborhood responded before the humans did, the way the light changed on the parade ground when the flag was being raised. He had been to places that do not appear on maps distributed to civilians. He had operated in conditions that are described in official documents with language so careful and compressed it bears almost no resemblance to what it felt like to be there. Fallujah, Kandahar, 2 rotations in Mosul that he referred to when he referred to them at all by the years rather than the names. He never talked about those things. What he talked about was breakfast, whether the truck needed new tires, the particular stubbornness of the pecan tree in the backyard that produced half a pound of nuts every November and made a mess of the gutters every October without fail. He talked about Sloan. On the morning in question, they were in the backyard before sunrise. The grass was still wet. The pecan tree was dark against the sky, going purple at the edges. Garrett was in running shorts and an old army t-shirt that had been washed so many times the letters had faded to suggestions. Sloan was in sweatpants she'd outgrown at the ankle. He was teaching her how to fall. Not how to fight, not yet. How to fall. How to take the ground's impact without letting it take anything from you. How to roll, how to absorb, how to be on the floor, and already thinking about what comes next before the sound of landing has finished echoing. Most people fight the ground, he told her. They try to stop the fall midway. That's when you get hurt. The ground is going to win. It always wins. The question is whether you land on your terms or its terms. Sloan hit the wet grass for the fourth time. Got up. Her father watched her the way he watched everything steadily, without expression, missing nothing. Again, he said. She went down again. Better that time. Her left arm absorbed the impact the right way, tucked close, not extended. She came up faster. Again. They did this for 40 minutes. The sky went from purple to orange to the flat white of a North Carolina summer morning building toward 90 degrees. By the time Lorraine called from the back door that breakfast was ready, Sloane's sweatpants were grass-stained at both knees, and her hair had come loose from its tie, and she was breathing hard and smiling, which she did not entirely mean to do. "What are you smiling at?" her father said. It wasn't a question. It was something warmer than that. "It doesn't hurt as much," she said. He nodded once. "That's the point." They walked inside and ate scrambled eggs and toast, and he drank his coffee, black the way he always did. And her mother moved around the kitchen in that efficient way she had, that particular economy of motion that 20 years of night shifts will build in a person, and the radio in the corner played the news low, and the pecan tree threw a long shadow across the kitchen window. Sloan would remember that morning for the rest of her life. Not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing dramatic happened. Because it was ordinary in the specific way that things are only ordinary until they're gone, and then they become the thing you'd give anything to have back for 1 hour one morning, one cup of coffee at a table that no longer exists. Her father believed in a very small number of things with complete conviction. He believed in preparation, not optimism preparation. The difference, he said once, is that optimism hopes the bad thing won't come. Preparation accepts that it will and decides in advance what to do about it. He believed that strength had a purpose, and that purpose was protection, and that any other use of it was a kind of waste. He had seen what happened when strong men used their strength without a reason worth having. He carried it quietly. He believed that the most dangerous people he had ever encountered were not the loud ones. Loud people were trying to convince you of something, and that meant they weren't sure. The ones who were sure had nothing to prove. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't make their point twice. They waited, and when the moment came, they were already exactly where they needed to be. He called it tactical patience. Army Rangers are trained in this, specifically the ability to hold position under fire, under pressure, under the particular psychological weight of waiting until the moment is precisely right. Not a moment early. Precision matters. Timing is everything, and timing cannot be rushed. Garrett Holt brought that home. He taught it the same way he'd learned it, through repetition, through practice, through the gradual accumulation of small disciplines that over time became something larger than the sum of their pieces. Sloan learned tactical patience before she learned to drive. She learned to breathe before she learned to strike. She learned to read a room, the exits, the distances, the body language of the people in it, the way other kids her age learned to read social media. She learned that the question is never whether you can do something. The question is whether you should. And that question, her father said, is the only one that separates force from violence. Violence is what happens when you've lost control. He told her, sitting across from her at the kitchen table at Fort Bragg 2 months before the accident that would take him. When the anger is making the decisions instead of you. Force is what you use when you're the last thing standing between someone helpless and something wrong. She was 13 years old when he told her that, and she didn't understand it completely. Not yet, she would. Harlow, North Carolina is not a large town. It has a diner that's been operating under 3 different names since 1987, but has had the same cook since 1994. It has a Walmart and a Dollar General and a hardware store that everyone uses, but nobody can explain how it stays in business. It has a high school with a gymnasium that smells like old rubber and ambition, and a football team that does better in some years than others, and the particular social architecture that small American towns build around their high schools, elaborate, invisible, and merciless to anyone who arrives not knowing the rules. Lorraine Holt moved them to Harlow in August of 2024 because the rent was $400 a month less than where they'd been, and $400 a month meant something to a woman working night shifts at a regional hospital and raising a daughter alone. She didn't talk about it as a sacrifice. Lorraine Holt did not talk about most things as sacrifices. She talked about them as logistics, as the next thing that needed to be handled, as the practical consequence of decisions made by circumstances outside her control. She had been married to a soldier for 14 years. She had learned a particular economy of emotion that looked from the outside like toughness and was on the inside something more complicated. She missed her husband with a precision that had not dulled in 2 years. She carried it the way people carry things they have decided they cannot put down, quietly, without calling attention to it. The house in Harlow had thin walls and carpet that had seen better decades and a kitchen window that faced a fence, which meant the mornings were dark longer than they needed to be. Lorraine painted the kitchen yellow the first weekend they arrived, not because she had the time, because some things cannot wait for the right time. Sloan unpacked her room in 2 hours on the day they arrived. She arranged her books on the shelf in the order she'd read them, which tells you something different about a person than alphabetical order does. She put her father's Army Ranger tab on the windowsill where she could see it from the bed. She put the watch in the drawer of the nightstand because she wasn't ready for the windowsill yet. The watch was a Seiko Field Watch government issue scratched on the crystal in 2 places from things she didn't know the stories of. He had worn it every day of his service. She had watched his wrist across 1,000 meals and car rides and backyard mornings, the watch catching light on its way to becoming something she associated with safety itself. He had a rule about it. He had told her once in the specific way he had of saying important things as if they were practical things. You wear that when you're ready to be accountable for what your hands do. She had never worn it. She put it in the drawer. Started at Ridgeway High on a Monday in late August, walking in through the main entrance with a backpack that was older than most of the other students' phones and sneakers that had been resold once and were starting to need it again. She wasn't nervous. She was aware of the space the way her father had taught her to be aware of spaces, the layout, the density of people, the acoustics. She was reading the room before she was inside it. She knew how new schools worked. She knew the first week was a kind of audition she hadn't been invited to and didn't want to roll in. She kept her head up. She found her classes. She ate lunch alone the first day at a table near the windows, and she watched. She was good at watching. It was on the third day that she first saw Wren Aldridge. Wren was 15 years old and small for it, with dark eyes that moved quickly around a room and a leg brace on her left leg, the legacy of a bout of polio that had arrived in her life before she had the vocabulary to understand what it was taking from her. She walked with a gait that was slightly uneven, a rhythm that was her own, something she had long since stopped apologizing for, if she had ever apologized for it at all. She was standing in line in the cafeteria waiting for her food when Dax Merritt walked past, and his shoulder connected with hers in that particular way that is designed to look accidental and isn't. Her tray tilted. Her cup of juice went over the edge and hit the floor and broke open and spread in a wide orange stain across the linoleum. People nearby looked at the juice, not at Wren, not at Dax, who kept walking without breaking stride, without looking back. Wren looked at the juice for a moment. She bent carefully the way someone bends when one leg makes bending a considered thing and started picking up the pieces of the plastic cup. Sloan was 3 people back in line. She set her tray on the nearest table and walked over and crouched down without saying anything and began picking up pieces of broken plastic. Wren looked at her. Sloan looked at the floor. They picked up the pieces together. "Thanks," Wren said. Sloan nodded. They stood. Wren had her tray in one hand and the broken pieces of cup in the other, and she was looking at Sloan with an expression that contained something careful in it, something that had learned to be careful. "You're new," she said. 3 weeks, Sloan said. Wren nodded. "You picked the wrong table that first day," she said. "But you figured it out by the second." She said it as an observation, not a criticism, like someone who catalogs things. "You pay attention," Sloan said. Wren smiled small and quick. "It's the only useful thing I do in this building." She reached into her jacket pocket and showed the corner of a small notebook, dark green cover worn at the corner. "I write things down." "What kind of things?" "Things that happen," Wren said simply, and put the notebook back. They got their food and Wren sat at the table near the windows, and after a moment Sloan sat across from her, and that was the beginning of the only friendship Sloan would make at Ridgeway High, which turned out to be the only one she needed. Colt Brennan noticed Sloan on the 4th day. This is important to understand precisely because Colt did not notice people randomly. He noticed them the way a point guard notices the defensive formation, not because he was told to, but because it was the skill that made everything else possible. He read rooms. He read people. He had been doing it since he was old enough to understand that understanding people before they understood you was an advantage you could build on. He was 17, and he had been the most important person at Ridgeway High since he was 14, when he made the varsity basketball team as a freshman on raw talent and the particular intensity of someone who needs winning the way other people need air. He was good. That much was real. His coach, a man named Dwight Reese, who had been at Ridgeway for 22 years and had seen 3 players go on to Division I programs, said privately that Colt had the best basketball instincts he had coached in 2 decades. He said it with a particular tone that people sometimes use when a compliment contains something they can't fully endorse. Because the thing about reading people, really reading them in the practiced, precise way that Colt did it, is that the skill itself is neutral. It's a tool. What determines its character is the person holding it and what they decide to build with it. On the court, Colt used it to win games. Off the court, he used it to maintain order. This is the word he used internally, though he'd never said it aloud. Order. He had built something at Ridgeway High over 4 years in intricate social architecture, and he maintained it the way a city maintains its roads constantly, without drama replacing what crumbled before it became visible. The system functioned because everyone inside it understood without being told that the consequences of disrupting it were social and swift. Sloan Holt had been in his building for 4 weeks and had not once responded the way he expected her to. This fact occupied him. He had tried the standard approaches. The comment in the hallway. The notebook. The water bottle knocked to the floor. Each time she absorbed it and continued, and each continuation was its own kind of statement, one he couldn't fully decode, which made it worse than defiance. He had stood next to her in the hallway before lunch, paging through her notebook, and she had looked at him and said, in a voice as level as a carpenter's tool, "Are you done?" He had given the notebook back without deciding to. He'd done it before he meant to, and it was only later, reconstructing the exchange, that he realized he'd handed it back before he chose to. Something in the quality of her stillness had short-circuited the sequence, and he did not know what that something was, and not knowing was worse than anything else. He decided to change the approach. The first thing Sloan noticed about the change was its direction. Colt stopped targeting her directly. He had been watching her not react for 3 weeks and arrived at a recalculation, not anger but adjustment. A point guard down by 4 in the fourth quarter doesn't panic. He finds the angle that hasn't been tried. Colt found his angle the same way he found everything, by identifying what the other person cared about most, then going there instead. Ren Aldridge became the target on a Thursday. It was not random. Colt had observed that Ren was the only person in the school Sloan talked to with any regularity, that they sat together at the window table every lunch period, that there was an ease between them that indicated something had been established. He had also observed that Ren was visible, the brace, the gait, the particular way she moved through the school that made her presence undeniable, which meant that whatever happened to her happened publicly. The first thing was her locker. Someone had arranged the contents so that they fell when she opened it, not vandalized, just arranged, which meant nothing was broken and nothing could be reported. Ren crouched in the hallway and recovered her books while the morning traffic flowed around her. Sloan arrived 2 minutes later and helped her collect them. Neither of them spoke about it as a thing that had been done. The second thing was the cafeteria line, the same move Dax had run the first week, because the logic of not fixing what isn't broken is powerful in simple minds. Ren's tray, her food on the floor, the studied indifference of the people around her. Sloan was not there when it happened. She found out when she arrived at the window table and found Ren sitting with no food, the green notebook open in front of her writing. Sloan got 2 lunches and put one in front of Ren without comment. "You don't have to do that," Ren said. "I know," Sloan said. They ate. Ren wrote in the notebook between bites the time what had happened, 2 names of students who had been close enough to see it clearly. She wrote it in the matter-of-fact way of someone who has decided to make the record even when no one is asking for it. Sloan watched her write. "How long have you been doing that?" Sloan asked. Ren didn't look up. "Since the 2nd month of 8th grade," she said, "when I understood that nobody else was going to." Sloan looked at the notebook, at the small, dense handwriting filling the pages, at the dates in the margins running back further than Sloan had been in this state. "That's a long time to be paying attention," Sloan said. Ren closed the notebook, looked at the cafeteria, at Colt's table where he was eating with his team, talking, laughing at something not looking their way. "He doesn't have to look," Ren said. "He already knows." She paused. "He does this. When someone doesn't work the way he wants, he finds something they care about." She said it without emotion, the way a person describes weather. He's done it before. He'll do it until something stops him. What stops him? Sloan said. Wren considered this honestly. For 2 years, I thought the answer was enough evidence. A pause. I'm starting to think the answer is something else. She didn't say what else. She picked up her fork and they finished lunch in silence. That evening, Sloan went home the long way. 25 minutes instead of 20. The air was cooler now, October beginning its serious work on the Carolina hills. She let herself think about what was building, not whether it was building, because that was settled, but about what shape it was taking and what the right response to that shape was. She had been in enough places to know that Colt Brennan was not going to stop. She had given him 3 weeks of information about what she would absorb, and he had processed that information and recalibrated, and the recalibration pointed at Wren. She understood this clearly. The question was the same question it always was, the one her father had put in her chest like a compass that never stopped pointing, not whether she could respond, but when. She walked past the hardware store, past the diner. The air smelled like cut grass in the beginning of autumn, that first hint of something changing. She let herself into the empty house. Lorraine was at the hospital. The kitchen was yellow and the fence made the evening dim. She sat at the kitchen table and she put her hands flat on the surface and she breathed the way her father had taught her, the slow rhythm of it, the deliberate claiming of stillness when everything in her chest was asking for something else. She thought about Wren's notebook and about what it would take to make it matter, about the gap between documentation and consequence, about systems and who they served and who they didn't. She sat with those thoughts for a long time. Then she got up and went to her room and stood in front of the mirror on the back of the closet door. She ran the sequence her father had taught her, the series of movements that began slow and built, that traveled through the body in a specific order her father had called a conversation between intention and execution. She ran it slowly, first feeling each piece of it, then at the speed it was meant to be run, which was fast in the way that things are fast when they have been practiced until they require no conscious thought. She stopped, looked at herself in the mirror. She could was the thing. She had known for 2 years that she could. The knowing was not the question. She went to the nightstand and opened the drawer and looked at the watch. 2 scratches on the crystal. Steady face. The hands moving with the unhurried precision of something that does not need to be told what time it is. She put it back. Closed the drawer. Not yet. But the yet was different than it had been a month ago. It had a different weight, a different proximity. She could feel the distance closing with the patient, inevitable arithmetic of something that was always going to happen. She lay down in the dark and put her hands flat on her chest the way she'd put them on the cafeteria floor, open and still, and she looked at the ceiling and let the stillness hold her. Patient, deliberate, the ground waiting on her terms. The following Tuesday, Sloan went to the principal's office. This was not a decision made in anger. It was the next logical step in the sequence, the attempt to use the system before concluding the system was unavailable. Her father had taught her this too. The escalation of force is a ladder, not an elevator. You don't skip rungs because it's faster. You climb them in order because every rung you can demonstrate you tried gives you something afterward, whether it worked or not. The principal's name was Gerald Mathers. He had been at Ridgeway for 11 years, and he had the particular quality of institutional leadership that develops in people who have learned that longevity requires the careful management of problems rather than their resolution. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had learned to read situations for what they meant for his own stability. He listened to Sloan with the careful attention of someone who was already composing his response. She laid it out without embellishment. The dates, the specifics, the pattern. She described what had happened to Wren, the locker, the lunch, the accumulation, and described the people involved by name calmly, the way her father had described things in debriefs, facts only, emotions set aside because emotion was not what was needed in that room. Mathers listened. He asked 2 questions. He wrote something on a notepad. He said he would look into it. He said the school had a zero-tolerance policy. He said these words in the way that people say words they have said many times, words that have had the meaning worn off them through repetition until they are more sound than substance. Sloan watched his posture when she named Colt Brennan. Just slightly, just the weight shifting to one side. That small adjustment that said everything about who occupied what position in the actual architecture of this place. She thanked him. She left. She walked home knowing what she'd learned, which was not that the system was broken. It was that the system was working exactly as designed, oriented toward the comfort of the people who made it comfortable to operate in and away from the people who needed it most. This was information. She filed it and kept moving. That week, Wren showed her the full archive. Not the green notebook she carried, now the full record which lived in a shoebox under Wren's bed and contained 5 notebooks going back 2 years and 3 months. Each one dated at the spine. Each one written in the same tight hand. They sat in the corner of the school library during a free period, and Wren laid 3 of them on the table between them, and Sloane turned pages and read. It was a remarkable document, the kind that required a specific discipline to maintain the discipline of believing over a long period of discouraging time that the record mattered even when nothing confirmed it, even when each entry joined a growing list of things that had happened and been followed by more things. Wren had kept writing anyway. "There's enough here," Sloane said. Wren nodded slowly. "There's been enough for a long time." "The parent board," Sloane said. "Not Mathers, above him." Wren looked at her. "They meet on the second Thursday. I looked it up last year." She paused. "I never went because by then I figured I knew how this goes." "What if it doesn't go that way this time?" Sloane said. Wren was quiet for a long time, long enough for the library to do its quiet things around them, pages turning, the low hum of the heating system, the distant sound of a class changing. "Okay," Wren said finally, and picked up the oldest notebook and put it back in her bag. They spent 3 evenings preparing the submission. Sloane organized it chronologically and then by category: verbal, physical, property damage, witness, documented, so that the structure itself made the pattern undeniable without requiring the reader to do the work of connecting it. Wren knew the content. Sloane knew how to arrange it so that anyone who read the first 2 pages would read the rest. They submitted it on a Wednesday, one day before the parent board meeting. On Friday morning, word filtered down through the informal networks that carry real information faster than any official channel. Colt had been called to the principal's office. He and Dax had received verbal warnings. The parent board had reviewed the submission. Verbal warnings. Sloane sat across from Wren at the window table and held this information. 2 years, Wren said. Verbal warning. She said it without heat. She closed her green notebook and set her pen down and looked at the ceiling in the way that people look at ceilings when what they're feeling is too large for the available space. Then she looked back down. "It's something," she said. Sloane said, "It's something." They ate their lunch. Sloane let herself feel briefly the loosening in her chest, the easing of the constant, low-level vigilance. She'd been running for 6 weeks. She noted it. She noted that she distrusted it. She kept the vigilance at the level her father had called maintenance watch, which was not the same as standing down. That weekend on Saturday morning, she sat in the kitchen with Lorraine over real coffee. Lorraine's Saturday coffee, the good kind, the small act of declaration that separated the one morning she was home from the rest of the week. They talked around the edges of school, the way they'd learned to navigate it, finding the perimeter without the center. Then Lorraine said without looking up from her cup, "You okay at that school working on it?" Sloane said. Lorraine looked at her for a moment. The yellow kitchen held them both. "Your father used to say that," she said. "I asked him once how a mission went, and that's what he said." She smiled when she said it. Something that was fond and grieved at the same time, the way certain expressions can be both things simultaneously when a person has had enough time to reach an accommodation with their own history. "Did it help?" Sloane asked. When he said it. Lorraine thought about this honestly. "Mostly," she said. "Some days more than others." She finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, put it in the rack. "Some days working on it is all there is, and that's enough." She went to change for her afternoon errands, and Sloane sat alone at the table and looked at the kitchen and thought about enough. She thought it probably wasn't, not this time. She was right. The first Monday after the parent board meeting, Colt came to school carrying something different. Not anger, something colder. The expression of a person who has been given information, who has been called to an office, who has been told that someone went above his head, who has traced the line from the submission back to its source and has made a decision about what to do with it. A point guard reading a defense and finding a new angle. Sloane watched him cross the cafeteria that morning and saw the shift in how he moved. She raised the maintenance watch a degree higher. The week passed without incident. She logged this as preparation, not peace. The following Monday, Wren did not show up to first period. She was there by second, 15 minutes late note from the office. She sat down next to Sloane in the class they shared and opened her notebook, and Sloane could see that her hand was not entirely steady. After class in the hallway, Sloane looked at her. "Someone got into my locker before school," Wren said quietly. "The green notebook," Sloane said. Wren shook her head. "Not the green one. I don't keep it in the locker anymore." She touched the notebook against her chest. "A textbook. And a letter." "What kind of letter?" Wren was quiet for a moment. She did not look frightened exactly. She looked like someone who has been expecting something for a long time and has now received confirmation. The kind that tells you they know where you keep things. Sloane looked at her. They know about the shoebox, she said. Wren nodded. Sloane breathed. Not the counted rhythm of the early days she was past needing the structure of it. Just the choice to be still when everything in her chest was asking her not to be. The thing about the shoebox was not that it was under a bed. It was that it was in Wren's house. Her bedroom. Her private space, the last space that was fully hers. The violation of it was not a locker. It was something much closer. They went to class. They went to lunch. Wren wrote in the green notebook with a pressure she didn't usually use faster than usual, the pen leaving deeper marks on the page. Sloane watched and said nothing about it because naming it was not what Wren needed. What Wren needed was someone sitting across from her who was running a different calculation. Someone already further down the road. Sloane sat across from her and was that. The following Thursday, 3 weeks after the parent board submission, Sloane was walking toward the east exit of the school at 3:15 later than usual because she had stayed to make up a quiz. The hallways had largely cleared. The building had that end-of-day quality, that deflating hum of an institution returning to its minimal state. She was halfway to the exit when she stopped. Not a sound she consciously identified. An absence of the right sounds, the particular quality of too much quiet in a direction that shouldn't be quiet at this hour. Her father had described this once the body processes threat data before the conscious mind catches up. He called it the ahead of the checklist feeling and said to trust it every time without exception. She changed direction, moved toward the east parking lot. She saw them before they heard her coming. Dax Merritt and Tanner Voss had Wren backed against the side of a car, not touching her, but the geometry of the situation was its own kind of contact. The configuration of position and intention that makes leaving impossible without permission. Wren's bag was open. On the ground at her feet was the green notebook, open to the middle pages being leafed through by Dax's hand in the specific way you handle something that belongs to someone else when you want them to feel the handling. Tanner was talking. Sloane caught the end of it. All of them, he was saying. Every single one. That's what he said. Every book. Wren was not looking at either of them. She was looking at the notebook in Dax's hand with her shoulders held in the particular way that people hold themselves when stillness is the only option remaining. Sloane walked toward them at a pace that communicated nothing in advance, not urgency, not casualness. Her father's pace. The pace of someone who has already decided and is simply closing the distance. Dax looked up when she was close enough that looking up was the only option. She looked at him with an expression that said clearly and without performance that whatever he was about to say was not going to change what was about to happen. He let the notebook fall. She bent and picked it up and held it out to Wren without looking away from Dax. Dax and Tanner looked at each other, at her, at each other again. They left. Not in a hurry in the way people leave when they've done what they came to do and have somewhere else to be. They got in Dax's car and drove out of the lot with the casual deliberateness of people who don't consider you worth acknowledging. Colt was not there. He was never there. Clean hands. He was never in the room when the room got bad. Sloane turned to Wren. Wren had the notebook pressed against her chest with both hands. The brace on her left leg had a crack in the lower support, recent contact. Not enough to affect the function, enough to show that something had made contact with it. "Are you okay?" Sloane said. "He knows about all of them," Wren said. "The shoebox. He told them to get all of them, all 5 notebooks." Her voice was steady in the way things are steady when they've decided to be. "Not this time," she added, but Sloane said. Wren looked at the parking lot where Dax's car had been. Then she looked at Sloane with the direct quality she sometimes showed when she was too tired to be careful about it. "How long are you going to wait?" she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a real question from someone who had been keeping records for 2 years and 3 months and had watched every official channel produce nothing and was now sitting in a parking lot with a cracked brace and asking the only person she trusted whether the waiting had an end. Sloane looked at her. "Not much longer," she said. She meant it. They walked to the bus stop without talking. The afternoon light was doing what October light does when it gets low, going gold and long and a little elegiac, making everything look like the last version of itself. The oaks along the road had committed fully to orange, no more green underneath. Sloane watched Wren stand at the bus stop in that light, the notebook against her chest, and she thought about 2 years and 3 months of careful writing. About a shoebox. About clean hands in a clean room far from parking lots. The bus came. Wren got on. She looked at Sloane through the window as the bus pulled away, and Sloane held up one hand, not a wave, just acknowledgement, a here still here, and Wren nodded once and faced forward. Sloane walked home, not her usual route. She walked without particular direction through streets she knew and streets she was still learning, and she was inside the walking in the way that you're inside certain states of thinking where the body handles the logistics and the mind goes somewhere else. She drove past her own street 3 times. The fourth pass, she stopped in front of the house and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the yellow kitchen light coming through the fence in the side window, a small, warm rectangle in the beginning dark. She went inside. Lorraine was home. On Thursdays, she came between shifts to sleep a few hours before the night started. The house had the held quality of a space trying not to disturb itself. Sloane went to the kitchen, sat at the table, put her hands flat on the surface and sat for a long time. Then she went to her room and opened the nightstand drawer. She looked at the watch. She looked at it for a long time. The 2 scratches on the crystal. The face steady and functional hands moving with unhurried precision. She thought about what wearing it meant. He had told her once, and once had been enough. She thought about accountability, not pride, not celebration. The specific clear-eyed ownership of a person who does a thing they believe is right and carries both the rightness and the praise without separating them, without letting the rightness become permission to forget the cost. She was not ready to wear it yet, but she was close enough to know the difference between not yet and never, and tonight was not yet and never was off the table. She put it back, closed the drawer, stood in front of the mirror. She ran the sequence the way it was meant to be run, the full thing at full speed, everything her father had built into her over those 40 minutes in the wet grass and the hundreds of mornings that followed. The body knew. She didn't need to name the parts anymore. She stopped, breathed, looked at herself. The question was always the same, not whether she could. The question was, is this the moment? She looked at herself in the mirror, and she knew, not as analysis but as something more fundamental, the way the compass doesn't analyze north. It just points that the moment was close, that the distance had collapsed to something she could feel the edge of. Not tonight, but tomorrow was a possibility. The day after was a near certainty. She turned off the light and lay down in the dark and looked at the ceiling, hands open and flat on her chest, and she let the stillness do what it did: hold. Everything contain everything. Maintain the tension between capacity and choice that her father had spent years building in her. In the nightstand drawer, the watch kept its own time. Steady, patient, waiting for her to catch up. The morning it happened, Sloane woke before her alarm. This was not unusual. She had been waking before her alarm for 2 years, since the morning a man from the army came to the door with his hat in his hands, in the particular expression of someone trained to deliver news that cannot be made better by delivery. Since then, her body had taken over the task of waking her before the day could begin without her permission. She lay in the dark for a while. The house was quiet. She had dreamed about her father. Not the accident, she never dreamed about that. She had dreamed about the backyard, the wet grass, the pecan tree, the particular orange of the North Carolina sky in the summer at 5 in the morning, going lighter by degrees, that slow daily proof that the dark is temporary. She had dreamed about falling, about the ground coming up and her hands flat and open, not fighting it, landing on her terms, already thinking about what came next before the sound of impact finished. She got up, made her bed the way her father had, corners tight, pillow centered. She went to the kitchen and made real coffee. She sat at the table with it, and her hands flat on the surface, and the yellow walls and the fence making the morning dim. She thought about what she knew. She knew Colt had recalculated again after the parking lot, that the parking lot had been a communication, that the message was the notebooks, all of them, and there was nothing she could do about it because the system had confirmed what he already believed, that the system was his. She knew that Wren had moved the shoebox again in the days since. She hadn't asked where. Some things are more protected by not being said. She knew Colt was never in the room when the room got bad. She had been watching this for 7 weeks, and she understood the pattern clearly. The clean hands, the precise distance, the architecture of consequence without fingerprints. She knew what today was going to be, not the exact shape. But the weight of it had been accumulating with direction, moving toward a conclusion, and this morning the weight had reached a threshold she recognized in her chest as arrival. She finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, put it in the rack. She went to her room and opened the nightstand drawer. She looked at the watch for a long time, the 2 scratches on the crystal, the steady face. She picked it up, held it for a moment in her palm, not heavy, but present, the specific presence of an object that has been worn daily for years by someone who is no longer wearing it. Warmed by his wrist through 1,000 mornings she hadn't been there for. She understood holding it something she had gotten backwards for 2 years. She had thought wearing it was the signal of readiness, that it marked a threshold she would reach and then wear it to show she'd arrived. But that wasn't right. She had been ready for a long time. The watch was not the signal of readiness. It was the acceptance of accountability. The two things were different in the way her father had always made small distinctions that seemed small until they weren't. Being capable was one thing. Being willing to own what that capability did, that was something else. Something that cost more. Something that required more of you afterward, not before. She put the watch on. She fastened the buckle the way he'd worn it slightly loose because he'd said a watch worn too tight makes you feel the time passing rather than keeping it. She looked at it on her wrist for a moment. Then she put on her jacket, picked up her backpack, and walked to school. The cafeteria at Ridgeway High smelled in the mornings before the food service started of industrial cleaner and the residual warmth of yesterday's cooking. By noon, it was fully itself that complete cafeteria smell that every American who went to a public high school in the last 50 years would recognize immediately. The smell of 1,000 ordinary days, not all of them good. Wren was already at the window table when Sloan arrived. She had the green notebook on the table, but it was closed. She was eating without writing, which was unusual. She looked like someone who had decided something about the day and was sitting inside that decision, feeling its shape. Sloan set her tray down. They ate for a few minutes without talking. The cafeteria built toward its noon noise. I moved them again last night, Wren said. The other notebooks, where Sloan said, somewhere they won't find. She paused. I took pictures of all of them first. Every page, uploaded them. Smart, Sloan said. Wren looked at her notebook. It's not enough. I know it's not enough. She looked up. You know it's not enough. I know, Sloan said. So what does enough look like? Sloan thought about it honestly. Not as a rhetorical question, as a practical problem that deserved a considered answer. Enough looks like him understanding that the cost of continuing is higher than the cost of stopping, she said. He's never believed there was a cost, Wren said. Sloan looked at her. That's about to change, she said. She said it the way her father said things that were simply and practically true, without drama, without inflation. Wren looked at her for a moment and then looked at Sloane's wrist, at the watch. She looked at it for a long moment and something shifted in her expression, the particular expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for a thing and is now receiving confirmation that the wait is nearly over. She picked up her pen, opened the green notebook, began to write. They finished lunch without talking. Sloan was halfway through her food when the room's acoustics shifted. Not a new sound. The absence of the right sounds, the modulation of nearby conversation, that change in ambient noise when attention is redistributing itself toward a fixed point. She looked up before he arrived. Colt Brennan walked up to her table with Dax and Tanner behind him, and he walked with the quality of someone who has made a decision and is no longer deliberating. The quality of a conclusion. He stopped at her table, looked at her. He called her by the wrong name. First, "Hey, Carter," then corrected it with the smile already on which made the correction worse than the mistake. "Hey, Holt," she looked at him. The cafeteria had begun its redistribution, attention consolidating across 200 separate conversations toward a single point, the way a room behaves when it recognizes what's coming. She read the formation the way her father had taught her to read formations, not piece by piece, but whole in a single intake. Dax to the left, Tanner behind, Wren across the table with her pen still. Colt at the center, both hands on the table, performing size and proximity to a room that was performing attention back at him. She had seen this before. She knew exactly what it was worth. "You look comfortable," Colt said. "Considering." She didn't answer. He leaned forward, the posture calculated. She saw it as calculation, saw the staging of it. He was 17 and built for a court, and he understood what he looked like looming over a table at someone half his weight. Considering, he said again that we're going to finish what we started. He reached across and put his hand on her tray and shoved it sideways. Not off the table, just enough to spill. Her cup of water went over and spread toward Wren, who pulled back her notebook in time. The cafeteria made the sound of a room receiving what it has been waiting for. Colt straightened, still smiling. Then he turned toward Wren. He used a word that was designed to reduce her to her brace, to her gait, to the specific things she could not change about herself. He said it with the particular viciousness of someone who has run out of other tools. And something changed in the cafeteria. Not the sound, not yet. Something underneath the sound, the moral atmosphere of the room shifting the way rooms shift when a line is crossed that everyone can feel, even if not everyone could have said in advance where the line was. Wren looked at Colt. She looked at him the way she had looked at a lot of things for 2.5 years, steadily recording without flinching. Sloan stood up, not fast, not with the announcement of it. She stood the way her father had taught her to stand, from a position of disadvantage, efficient, economical expending, nothing unnecessary already where she needed to be before the standing was finished. She looked at Colt. She took a step toward him, not aggressive, the movement of someone for whom the decision was made before the situation arrived. The patient, deliberate movement of someone who has been waiting for the moment and has recognized it arriving. "You've been looking for a fight," she said. Her voice was level. The cafeteria was quiet enough that level was sufficient. "You found one." Colt moved. What happened next was not what the people who were there would describe when they told the story later. They would fill it with drama because the mind fills in what it expects. What actually happened was simpler than that and more complete. She moved, and Colt moved to meet her. The instinct of someone whose body has been trained to respond, and she wasn't where he was moving toward. She was already somewhere else. Her right foot came across in a specific low arc and found the back of his right heel at the moment his weight was fully committed forward, and the physics resolved themselves with the clean inevitability of a correctly set up equation. He went down, not forward into her. Down and sideways the way her father had gone down in the backyard. Demonstrations controlled complete the sound of it traveling through the cafeteria like something dropped into still water. Dax lunged. She had been watching him while she was watching Colt, the way her father had taught her to watch more than one thing. Dax's movement was what she'd expected, the lunge of someone acting on surprise rather than plan. She met his right arm at the wrist, both hands, a specific rotation of pressure, and his own momentum finished the work. He went to one knee. She held the control hold, not breaking anything, applying just enough that any further movement would be its own argument against itself. She held it for exactly the time required. Then she released it. Dax stayed on one knee looking at his wrist, then at her with the expression of someone who has encountered information he has no category for. Tanner Voss did not move. His body had made the decision before his mind had some situations communicate more clearly than instruction. The cafeteria was silent, not the silence of shock. Something more considered. The silence of 200 people revising their understanding of the situation they had been living inside. Sloane looked at Dax. "Go," she said. He and Tanner both went. Not running, moving with the speed of people who trying to leave a situation without acknowledging that they are leaving it. Colt was sitting on the floor. He had put himself upright, not standing, sitting back against the table legs extended in front of him. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not anger, not humiliation, though that was somewhere in it. Something stripped, something underneath the architecture he'd built over 4 years at this school. She looked down at him. She thought about Wren's notebooks, about the crack in the brace, about verbal warnings and a system oriented away from the people who needed it. She thought about what her father had said about force, about the last thing standing between someone helpless and something wrong. She had understood those words for 2 years. Standing here, she felt what they weighed. She said, "You could have been better than this." Not a judgment, not a verdict. A fact stated the way her father stated facts, without ornamentation, with the particular weight of something that is simply and precisely true. Colt's jaw moved. The social machinery he'd been running for 4 years trying to find purchase on a surface that had nothing for it to grip. She looked at him for a moment longer. At the 17-year-old boy sitting on a cafeteria floor, stripped of the architecture he'd built around himself, without the audience performing what it was supposed to perform. She said, "Your father know you do this," she said it quietly, not as a taunt, as a real question. Aimed at the thing she'd understood since she was 13 years old, that cruelty is rarely its own origin, that it travels through people from its source, that the most important question about what someone does is almost always where they learned it. She said it because it was true and because he deserved to have it said by someone who said it without wanting anything from him afterward. Colt went very still. Something in his face did what she had not entirely expected, not hardening, the opposite. Something that had been held very tight for a very long time, let go the way a fist lets go, not when it's forced open, but when the person holding it is simply too tired or has been given permission or has encountered for the first time someone who looked at them clearly and without cruelty and told them the truth. He looked like a 17-year-old boy, which was what he was under everything else. Sloane picked up her backpack from the floor where it had fallen. She walked to the table and looked at Wren, who was sitting exactly where she'd been sitting, the green notebook in front of her, pen in hand, eyes moving between Sloane and Colt and back. "You okay?" Sloane said. Wren looked at her, at the watch on her wrist, at her face. "Yeah," she said. "Steady." Teachers were moving through the cafeteria now, the room unfreezing, normal time resuming. Phones already in hands. The institutional response beginning its procedures. Sloan looked at the room doing its procedures. She picked up her bag and walked out of the cafeteria. Through the main doors and down the hallway, and past the row of lockers where her notebook had been leafed through, past the corridor where the water bottle had rolled through the exit door, and outside into November air that was cold and clean, and smelled like the end of autumn, like the last of the leaves releasing their hold. She stopped, let the door close behind her. She stood in the cold air, and the stillness came back naturally the way it always came, not forced, not performed, just the way she was. She looked at the watch on her wrist. The two scratches on the crystal caught the November light. She had worn it this morning thinking she understood why. Standing here now, she understood it more fully. It was not about the moment in the cafeteria. It was not about what her hands had done, as clean and controlled and necessary as that had been. It was about what she was willing to carry forward from this day, the rightness of it and the cost of it, both together unseparated, which was the only honest way to carry anything. Some things you don't get to put down after you pick them up. Her father had known this. He had carried his own version of it for 20 years, and he had built in her the capacity to carry hers, and he had done it before breakfast on wet mornings in a backyard in Fort Bragg, with the pecan tree throwing its shadow and the sky going from purple to orange while she fell and got up and fell again. This was what it was for. The door opened behind her. Wren came through it, backpack on green, notebook in hand, moving with her own rhythm on the cold asphalt. She stopped next to Sloan. They stood side by side and looked at the parking lot, the bare trees at the edge of it, the white November sky. After a while, Wren said, "You're going to get called to the office." "I know," Sloan said. "You know what they're going to say." "I know what they're going to say," Sloan said. Wren was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to say?" "I'm going to tell them exactly what happened," Sloan said. "In the order it happened, starting from the first week." Wren looked at her. "I've got 2 years and 3 months of backup," Sloan said. Wren looked at the green notebook in her hand. She held it up and looked at it the way you look at something you are revising your relationship to. She held it up and looked at it for a moment. Then she put it in her bag. Not with ceremony, not with anger, with the simple finality of something that has served its purpose and is now finished serving it in the way it has been serving it and needs to become something else going forward. She reached into her bag and produced another notebook. Smaller, black cover new, the spine still stiff. She had bought it that morning at the gas station near her house, the only place in Harlow that sold notebooks at 7:30 in the morning. She opened it to the first page. She wrote the date, November, the year. She wrote Ridgeway High School cafeteria. She wrote what had happened. Names, details, the sequence in the specific, careful way she wrote everything. But she wrote it differently than she'd written the others. The others had been written into silence, into the space of a situation that had no audience documented, because documentation was the only available action. This one she was writing into the aftermath of something that had changed shape. Sloan watched her write. "There's going to be more to write," Wren said without looking up. "For a while. It doesn't just stop because one thing happened." "I know," Sloan said. Wren kept writing. Her hand was steady. The conversations that followed with the vice principal, with the principal, himself with Lorraine, who arrived at 2 o'clock straight from a night shift with her coat still on and her hospital badge still clipped into her collar, were not the story. They were the administration of it, the processing of what had happened by institutions built for processing. The conversations were long in some places and short in others, and they involved Sloan laying out 7 weeks with the same flat precision she'd brought to the October meeting, and this time the documentation could not be made to disappear. It had been photographed. Uploaded, existed in the permanent and unlocatable way that digital records exist beyond the reach of anyone who wanted to manage them. Colt was suspended pending review. The notebooks were formally submitted. The process began its grinding, imperfect, better-than-nothing operation. After all of it, Lorraine drove them home. They sat in the kitchen in the evening. Real coffee again. The yellow walls. The fence making the night press closer than it needed to. Lorraine looked at the watch on Sloane's wrist. She looked at it for a long time. She did not say anything. Her face did the thing it sometimes did, that expression that was fond and grieved simultaneously, that accommodation with her own history that she'd been making and remaking for 2 years. She reached across the table and put her hand over Sloane's hand. Over the watch, she held it there for a moment. Then she let go and picked up her coffee. "He would have had something to say about today," Lorraine said. She said it to the middle distance, to the yellow wall, to the particular nowhere that people address when they are saying things addressed to more than the room. "What would he have said?" Sloan asked. Lorraine thought about it. She was honest in her thinking the way she was honest in most things. He would have said, now you know the difference between what Sloane said, between the person who can and the person who does. She paused. He always said those were two different people. Most people who can don't. Most people who do can't sustain it. The ones who can both and know the difference between when and when not to. He said those were the rarest kind. She looked at her coffee. He said that's what he was trying to make you, she said. The rarest kind. Sloane looked at the watch on her wrist. She thought about the 40 minutes in the wet backyard, about the scrambled eggs afterward, about the patient accumulation of a curriculum she hadn't been given a name for until now. She thought about what the rarest kind meant in practice, not in the abstract in practice. In a cafeteria on a November Tuesday, in a parking lot in October, in a library in September with 5 notebooks on a table between two people who had both been documenting things and waiting for the documentation to mean something. She thought about Wren on the front steps with the new black notebook open to its first page, writing into the aftermath of something changed, hand steady. The rarest kind was not the skill. She understood this now in the way you understand things that have been true about you for a long time and that you simply haven't had the occasion to name. The rarest kind was the waiting, the specific, costly, invisible work of maintaining not yet when not yet felt like nothing to everyone watching and felt like everything to the person doing it. The discipline of the compass, pointing without acting, knowing without rushing, trusting that the moment would arrive and that your only job until it did was to be ready. Lorraine finished her coffee, set the cup down, looked at her daughter across the yellow kitchen in the rented house in Harlow, North Carolina, and did not say anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying, and she had always known the difference. She went to bed. Sloane sat alone at the table. She sat with her hands flat on the surface, opened the watch on her left wrist, and she thought about her father and the way she had learned to think about him, not as loss, not as absence, but as presence, as something ongoing, as the thing that was still here because of what he had built and because she had carried it the way he trusted her to carry it, which was carefully and without complaint and for the right reasons and all the way to the end. She thought about the backyard and the wet grass and the pecan tree and the particular orange of the sky at 5 a.m. She thought about the way he looked at her across 1,000 meals and car rides and training mornings steadily, without expression, missing nothing, and the way that look contained something she could only now name accurately: confidence. Not in himself, in her. He had looked at her across all those ordinary mornings, and he had seen exactly what she was going to be, and he had not been afraid of it, and he had built toward it deliberately, and he had left before he could see it arrive. She thought about that for a long time. Outside, the November dark pressed against the fence, and the kitchen light held its small, warm rectangle against it, the yellow walls doing what Lorraine had intended them to do when she painted them the first weekend, which was to make the mornings less dim, to push back against the fence in the dark, to declare that the space inside was inhabited by people who intended to continue. Some declarations don't need to be loud. Some of the most important ones are made in kitchens, at tables in the early morning, before anyone else is awake, with a cup of coffee in both hands flat on a surface, in the decision already being carried, not yet complete, but moving, always moving in the patient and deliberate way of something that knows where it's going and is not in a hurry because it trusts that it will arrive. Garrett Holt never came home, but something he built did. It walked into Ridgeway High in worn-out sneakers, ate lunch alone for 3 weeks, and waited the way rangers wait until the moment was exactly right. Some fathers leave money, some leave land. He left her his hands. For those of you who raised daughters or who were raised by someone like Garrett Holt, who understood that the most important thing you can leave another person is not safety, but the capacity to provide their own. You already know what she was carrying in those worn-out sneakers, in that quiet stare, in those 7 weeks of not yet. Does this match what you remember trying to build?